We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Ken Arredondo. I am the CRO here at VirtualZ Computing. I have been in the mainframe world for a long time. I was with Unisys, IBM, and CA Technologies. At CA, I led Asia Pacific, Japan, Latin America, did integrations for integrations of companies into CA and global growth markets. Mark, our Vice President of Global Services, will be doing the bulk of the presentation. I turn it over to smart people. I just open it up. Mark spent 17 years at Accenture. Part of that time, he was leading part of the mainframe migration team and how he became introduced to VirtualZ and why he joined. We'll also have Vince Ray, who spent 30 years, a little over 30 years at CA Technologies. He wrote Top Secret, the mainframe security software product that was acquired by CA, led the development of the mainframe products for most of 30 years, and then left before the acquisition. CA, of course, now acquired by Broadcom. So these will be the folks that will be doing the majority of the talking for you today. Aaron, can you advance the next slide? Or is that you, Mark? Who we are is a woman-founded, woman-led startup company in the mainframe space, which you don't hear that every day. So it's pretty interesting. It's pretty exciting. We've got a lot of folks interested in that diversity and what we're doing. We have well over, I can say, 200 years of combined mainframe experience on the team. And looking for, I put us close to 200 myself. We have three main products, and I'm going to let Mark talk about that, but we have three main products. We focus on data, access to the mainframe, to and from the mainframe, real-time read-write. We're going to talk about Zaac today and the ability to use cloud-based storage. But we'll cover the other couple of products we have as well, and I'll let Mark do that as part of his presentation.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much there, Ken. So just a little bit of background on our products before I get into them in a little bit more detail, and then we'll focus in on Zaac and Zaac for storage use case. But all our products, when we developed them, we had the mindset of improving business agility of the mainframe, making it simple so you didn't need a ton of mainframe skills and talent to be able to use our products. And actually, our products are designed to enable cloud native developers and others that aren't as familiar with the mainframe to actually use and access data both on and off the mainframe. And then cost is extremely important. You hear on the market quite a bit that folks and clients want to manage their costs on a mainframe. They really don't want to see it go up. They want to keep it where it is, and in most cases also reduce the cost if they can as well. So as we get into our products, we keep all three of those things in mind as we develop and enhance them over time. So as Ken mentioned, we do have three main products. The first two, Lozin and Zaac, are really file sharing platforms or solutions. Lozin exposes files or allows a mainframe customer to share their files with non-mainframe applications. So that can be cloud applications or application in the data center, distributed applications. Files like vSAM, QSAM are easily exposed through Lozin, and we do data transformation both ways. Zaac is the opposite of Lozin. It's also a file sharing platform, but it would essentially, Zaac is the client where you can put mainframe files into the cloud or on a distributed environment, or as we'll talk about today, storage solutions, and access those files on the mainframe as if they are still on the mainframe, but they actually exist in the cloud. And we'll get into that in more detail how that works. Propels is a utility that we use. It's a lightweight ETL tool that you basically pass it, in short, you pass in a file, like a vSAM file, a copybook, and it'll replicate the data to a JDBC data source, any JDBC data source off the mainframe. So that can be in your data center, or that can be in the cloud as well. And we do support a significant amount of data, JDBC data sources today out of the box for that. All right, so Zaac is, like I said, the one we're going to focus on today. So let me go through, sorry, a little bit of just at a high level how Zaac is architected. As I mentioned, it's basically, think about it as Google Drive for your desktop, and your desktop in this case would be the mainframe. And so when you install Zaac, you then configure Zaac to manage a folder for you on the mainframe. Whatever you put into that folder, and where you've configured Zaac and for those files to go. So let's just take a simple scenario that you want Zaac to connect to S3 on AWS. Any file you put in there will essentially be written to S3 on AWS in real time, but it'll exist on the mainframe and look like it exists locally on the mainframe. So existing applications, whether it's JCL or batch jobs or whatever you have that exists today, if they're writing to those files, they'll still write to those files like they do today, but they'll just exist in one place. So you're not doing replication back and forth. You're not taking a file from the mainframe, writing it, and FTPing it over to S3 or vice versa. You're literally writing in real time to that file in S3. And we'll get into this in more detail as well, but basically that means all your security, your entitlements, your compliance, all that stuff still exists as it does today, right? So there's not a significant amount of updates that you need to do once you install Zaac. Actually, there's very little you need to do. Zaac will just take over the management of that file system that you've configured for Zaac to take over. You can imagine being able to write to different repositories or even data sources like MongoDB or like GitHub, or not, if you don't want to use cloud storage or environments on the cloud, you could also do physical storage like IBM and Dell and Hitachi solutions as well in your data center. Out of the box, for Zaac storage, we are really focused on supporting S3 right now. The main reason for that is that's obviously a popular solution in the market, but a lot of the storage solutions on other cloud providers and even physical storage actually are S3 compliant. So out of the box, we have the ability to support obviously S3. We can go to IBM Cloud Storage, we can go to Google Storage, Azure Storage, and then we can go to the physical storage as you see there on the right-hand side as well. So Zaac for storage is just one use case. We have some others, but focusing on just that, we can, and the key features, Zaac will actually allow you to write to multiple storage solutions at the same time. So if you wanted to configure Zaac and say, I'm going to replace a good portion of my DASD, and I'm going to use Zaac to manage my new storage solution, and I want to go out to the cloud, but I also want redundancy across multiple clouds, you can configure Zaac to go to Azure Storage as well as S3 in real time if you wanted. You could also do physical storage locally in your data center or in another data center, but you could write to physical storage as well as to Google Cloud Storage in real time. And so, as you can imagine, if you go to a solution where you're going to be dependent on the network being stable and managed, there's always the concern that the network could go down. And so one of the key features we have with Zaac is we actually do local caching as you're writing to those files, as well as we do journaling, right? So we keep track of everything that you're writing and doing, example for those data sets. And once that network's back up, we will continue where we left off when the network went down and right back to S3 or Azure or Google Storage or physical storage. So nothing's lost, right? Which I think is a key component and a concern that a lot of people have. So we do take care of that. What's really one of the big differentiators of Zaac is it's 100% software, right? And so once you have it installed and you do the basic configuration of managing, which folder you want to manage, where you want to, where you want to write to, you're up and running. We don't require a device like many of the other solutions on the market. We don't also do, we're not virtual tape, right? Or act as virtual tape. We act as virtual disk. So we're taking full of the capabilities of modern disk capabilities and leveraging that for storage on the mainframe. Things that you do today in your distributed environment, on a Linux environment, a Windows environment, we're just bringing those capabilities to the mainframe, and it basically acts in the exact same way. As I mentioned earlier, security. So if you got RACF or you've got other security solutions, managing those files like you do today, they'll still manage those files, entitlement, access, and everything else just like they do today. It doesn't change because those files are viewed as still being on the mainframe, but they actually exist off the mainframe. We also have an open architecture, and so what that means is Zaac is really a wrapper product that integrates with different drivers. So if you decided that you actually wanted to put files in Dropbox or Box instead, you can bring Dropbox or Box integration or driver and configure Zaac to use that driver and start writing to your Dropbox or Box environment as well. So that means you could actually create your own drivers or enhance those drivers or enhance your integration to S3 if you wanted to, or Azure Storage if there's something that you want to use or create that's not available in the standard drivers. We also can use the typical network protocols that are out there as well. So iSCSI. Our goal is really to start reducing the need for DASD and virtual tape. And so we do support virtual tape and virtual disk. We found that a lot of the solutions on the market that manage virtual tape and virtual disk, a lot of the way they manage those is very similar. But our solution is really 100% virtual disk, and we don't do any virtual tape emulation right now. I talked about SAN and physical storage already. And again, just to reiterate, you'll have full rewrite access to those files sitting in off the mainframe in a storage environment or your physical storage environment. That also gives you the capability for applications that are in the cloud or in your data center to also have access to read and write to that data. So we do have the ability right now, as you write files, they'll be in an FSDIC or mainframe format right in the cloud. And so, but we will have the capability in the future to do data transformation of those files in real time as well. So if you had a vSAN file today, you could essentially write it in a different format in S3, for example. So these are the major capabilities of Zaac for storage. I'm sure you guys can fully understand, the benefits this brings to a mainframe, right? So you look at a lot of the expensive solutions out there with virtual tape and DASD and existing storage. Being able to use low-cost storage like S3 or Azure Storage or Google Storage, and then being able to use the capabilities that S3 and Azure and Google and Dropbox, they all bring to the market. For example, if you were to use S3 in one location on the West Coast, but you wanted to take advantage of S3's capabilities, copies, so that if something happens with something on the data center on the West Coast, you could still bring it up and access it. You could take you can use those for redundancy and replication, and that full ability for high availability, if you will, right? That comes out of the box with those solutions. All right, this is where I will go into our website, where we've got a bunch of media blogs and even videos that demonstrates Zaac as well with storage with Azure Storage is the video I have on the bottom. Yep.
Hey, Mark.
Yep.
I thought before we go into the resources, there were a couple of questions. One came across in the chat regarding the data, the security around the data. So is the data encrypted as the data goes to the cloud? What encryption is out there for the data eventually is in the cloud for backup and archiving purposes? Sorry.
Yeah, so that's a great question around the encryption. So yeah, you can use encryption, but I will let Vince weigh in and provide a little bit more detail on how you can handle how Zaac handles that.
Oh, fine. Give me the hard ones. No,
I do the easy stuff.
yeah. So when you're talking about network storage, there are really a few different places that encryption gets to be important. As far as the data on ZOS goes, from your ZOS applications, if you're using any of the built-in features of ZOS that give you, what IBM advertises as encrypted data at rest, that continues to work exactly as it does today. We don't interfere with that. If you set up your DFSMS policies so that certain files are encrypted, that still works exactly the same way it works today. It's just that that data is not stored locally on a physical disk. That data is stored somewhere else in the cloud on whatever the storage provider does. So that's kind of the first tier of encryption, what happens inside of ZOS itself. And by the way, same is true if you're doing any type of kind of application level encryption. We don't interfere with any of that in any way. You should not be able to tell that you're dealing with cloud-based storage just because you're using Zaac. Looks and behaves exactly like all other storage on the mainframe would. The second level of encryption is, I'm going to talk about it as at the network level. And, there really, it depends on what the type of storage in the cloud that you're using supports. So if you're going to Amazon, for instance, that's typically SSL or TLS encryption in transit. Most every cloud storage provider I'm aware of is doing a similar thing there. So, I suspect the data in transit is probably the easy one because there's pretty uniform support for encryption there. Sometimes you get I'm going to call them special use cases where maybe you actually don't want encryption at that level. You might have, Mark mentioned our support for, maybe it's an on-prem hardware device, iSCSI, SAN, that might be 20 feet away from your mainframe right in the same data center. And you might look at that and say, you know what, I don't want to pay the overhead of encrypting all the traffic in that case. In that case, you're certainly free to turn it off, provide your own encryption. Same thing, you might be really high-end user of the cloud. You might use, like, Microsoft has a feature called Azure Express, which lets you provide your own network connections. You can be super high bandwidth, and for all we know, you might have a VPN in place. You might have already addressed the area of encryption to your satisfaction that way. And again, you might defer to that and say, I'd rather use that level of encryption than anything that comes with Zaac. And certainly we allow you to do that as well. So that's the network level. The third level is really at the storage provider side. So what does Amazon provide? What does Microsoft provide? What does Google provide, and so forth? And again, most of those are pretty sophisticated in terms of the encryption they offer. When I go to Amazon for testing, for instance, I can designate a whole bunch of different options about, do I want that storage physically encrypted? Do I want it, how are the keys managed? I mean, there are many options there. And again, keep in mind, if you've done encryption all the way back in ZOS at the ZOS level, the data that's getting to Amazon is already encrypted. So you may not want to do double encryption there. You may not want to do encryption in the ZOS system, encryption on the network, and encryption on the physical storage side. It's really very flexible, but it's ultimately function of what you're choosing as the cloud providers, how you choose to manage that storage, and all the options you would expect or are available there. And if it's any help, I mean, one way I like to think about it, and Mark alluded to this earlier, it's we have been doing what I'm describing for probably over a decade on Windows, on Linux, on other platforms. If I have a Windows server and I need, a few terabytes of storage in the next 10 minutes, it's pretty straightforward. I just point to S3 or whoever my favorite cloud provider is, and I've got that storage. Have all of those same requirements for encryption and all the other things that go along there. It works pretty well in those environments. What we've really done is bring that same exact model to mainframe sites, so you can have all those same benefits under ZOS that you have under all the other platforms. So yeah, I think a lot of options on encryption. And I guess the key takeaway is the important thing is, to have a policy in place of, where do you want to do the encryption? And, that might influence the storage provider you pick, or, some details of how you deploy that. So I hand it back to you, Mark.
Perfect. Thank you, Vince.
Yeah, and Mark, we have a question from one of our folks who couldn't make it, sent a 5-parter in, and we also have one more question here about latency. So they came in across the chat. Let's start with the latency one, then we'll jump over to the other one.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so latency, like Vince has talked about, right? I mean, in most cases, clients are already going to be using a cloud storage provider, right? And so they've already have a pretty good bandwidth that they're supporting from a network standpoint to go out to those clouds. But I mean, you could make it's fair if for some reason they don't have that more advanced network. You would want to upgrade your network to be able to support, like we were talking about with Microsoft Express, for example, Azure Express. And so, but still, making that investment plus the savings you're going to get with the cloud provider storage, we still think there's a very good business case to leverage cloud storage. However, if you've got online applications that are, need to access, for whatever reason, the storage in real time, you might want to look at physical storage in the data in your data center next or near to your mainframe, where the networks are going to be a lot stronger, right? But you're still going to get a significant cost savings as well. But Vince, did you want to add to anything, or maybe correct something I said?
No, well, I'll share one little bit of, we think of it as a secret sauce item. One of the unique things that we've implemented is, I'm sure everyone on the call has heard of journaled file systems, where the generally the updates can be done in a really high performance way, because you don't have to wait for the data to actually get to the disk. We've implemented something very similar to that for ZOS. We use some of the really cool built-in ZOS capabilities, system logger and parallel sysplex features and so on. And what tends to happen is it allows a lot of the network I/O to be done in an asynchronous way. So your application doesn't necessarily have to wait for the data to get all the way to the cloud and back before it can kind of keep on going. If you turn on the feature of journaled file system performance in Zaac, then what happens is, as soon as that data is kind of hardened, which generally means a copy is in a coupling facility or in a system logger structure someplace, as soon as we're convinced that that's hardened and persistent and not at risk of being lost, then we can consider the I/O complete. So it's it dramatically improves performance, especially in the case of heavy updates. Mark's point is totally on target, that a lot comes down to how much bandwidth do you have, and all of what else are you doing with the cloud provider. Our friends at Microsoft tell us that large Azure sites use their Azure Express function sometimes with 100 gig network connections. And if that's what you're doing, at least in our testing and modeling, we see that performance can be very close to native disk speeds, and certainly will never be as fast as a channel attached device with multiple paths to the device and all the other cool things that mainframe IO supports. But at the same time, for workloads like application testing and validation and things where maybe you don't require a gazillion IOs per second, suddenly the cost advantage gets to be really compelling, and you can live with the throughput you see there. So yeah, and again, everybody's going to be a little bit different depending what your configuration is, depending on how much you're paying the storage provider. Amazon, for instance, lets you pay a different price depending on how many IOs per second you need to support. Puts you on different classes of disk and all sorts of things there. So again, there's many options there, but if you do have something that's really critical, we feel pretty good about the kind of performance numbers you can see there.
Thank you, Vince. The typical business case on this, I mean, it's typically a 90% or up to 90% less investment on the disk, pennies in the dollar, and then offset by the product. So the savings is pretty strong, and Sundar, we can work on a cost analysis for you if you have a specific application or application or set of applications in mind. We can certainly do that. That was the next question. And we also, the one, I will get to this one, I don't want to miss it. The 5-parter out of Germany. How does Zaac cloud offering differ and/or compare? So how do we line up with, and I'll say them all at once, and let you, Mark, and Vince tackle it. So the first is TS 7700 cloud storage tier, the cloud tape connector for ZOS, CTC, the cloud data access or CDA, transparent cloud tiering, and then those are all IBM. And then the last one, BMC's AMI cloud, which is the old Model 9. So any comments or thoughts on that? I'll start with you, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think Vincent's well positioned to answer those questions better than I. But I mean, I know that a few of those require, at least maybe a couple of them require a device. I think most of those solutions are basically virtual tape solutions, and so I think those are some of the key differentiators. But Vince, I think you have much more experience with those products and awareness than I do on those.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to go into that, and I think you touched on the big points there. I think if we look at that kind of collection of products, and I'm sure there's other products we could mention that fit in that too, probably the biggest single differentiator is the whole, is it emulating a tape or something that feels like a sequential process, or is it a true disk emulation? The reason that's important is, suppose I don't know, suppose you're a QA manager and you've got new version of some internal app that you're going to test. You need a terabyte or a couple of terabytes of data, and you want to get this testing done. And maybe you're convinced that kind of the old way of doing that, order more physical disk or shuffle things around to clear up enough space for what you're trying to. I mean, that's time consuming, it's slow, it's expensive, cumbersome. You see the light and you decide you want to leverage cloud storage for that. Well, with most of those products that Ken mentioned that kind of come down to virtual tape emulation, you're not going to be able to do things like, my application needs a vSAM file. How do you define a vSAM file on a tape? You can't. So, right away, there's one significant difference. With Zaac, you would see on your ZOS system something that looks all the world like one or more standard 3390 disk devices. So you go to those devices, you create your vSAM files, and they behave all the world like any other disk in your environment. So suddenly you're able to do, and this is honestly part of the business case we talk about. It's a on-demand model, in literally minutes, you can have as much storage as you want. And, you run your testing. There's no restrictions. I mentioned vSAM. You want to create a DB2 table space that's backed by Amazon S3 physical storage. Of course you can do that because it's, again, it just looks like a normal disk to, whatever you're running on ZOS. So the breadth of applications you can support and what they can do is truly unlimited with Zaac. There's no constraints whatsoever. And as we covered, it might be a little bit slower, but it's pennies on the dollar generally compared to buying physical hardware. And it's totally on demand. In the next 10 minutes, you can have storage as you want, use it for, a day or two to do whatever you need to do, and then it's gone again. It's not a long-term forever commitment here. So, that's the most important difference. A few of the solutions that were talked about, it's similar. They may not be tape. They may, like, in the current ZOS system, there's some support for cloud connectivity. Those are basically, I think of them as enhanced file transfer kinds of capabilities. So instead of using FTP to get to Amazon, I'm using something a little newer that knows how to talk Amazon's protocol directly, or Google or Azure, or whatever your favorite is there. So that's again, it's really the same set of issues. I'm not going to be able to use that to create a vSAM file in the cloud, for instance. Same basic set of problems. It's just a different implementation there. The other point I want to make is something else that Mark touched on was it is what we do is an open architecture, and we don't require any code in the cloud. There's no agent or management function that has to live with your data. So there's no APIs you have to go through on the cloud side to get to that data if you need to. It's totally driver based, and on top of that, we're careful to use industry standards for that driver protocol. So let's say you want your company standardizes on Dropbox, and we don't have Dropbox support. No reason in the world. I mean, certainly we'd be happy to look at that and develop that, but Dropbox could write that software. You guys could write that software. It's not a particularly difficult thing to do. It can basically map to just about anything you could imagine that can communicate over a network and do certain set of IO requests. So that open architecture is a really important thing too. Many of the solutions we see out there, you're kind of to a good degree, you're held hostage by the vendor. It's what do they support? They support maybe Amazon, Azure, and Google, but what do you do if you need Dropbox or Box or an iSCSI device that you want to have inside your own data center? Those are often you're at the vendor's mercy for that. And in our case, if that's a priority, I mean, certainly we'd love to talk to you about getting it done, but you're not dependent on us to get that done. That could be done by large number of folks out there. So I think those are kind of the general differences that we talk about. I think we can go down into the weeds, talk about fault tolerance, talk about some of the other things that we can do.
Yeah.
But those are the basic characteristics that separate us from a lot of the things that have come before.
So Vince, there was another question that came in while you were speaking, which I believe you just answered. It's around JCloud connecting to all the providers or native connectors. I think you just covered that. Is that right? It just says SM. Was that question covered for you, or is there anything else you want to expound on that? The question specifically is, are you using JCloud for connecting to all cloud providers or native connectors for their features?
Yeah, so let me, well, while we're waiting for an answer to that, let me just amplify on what I described before. We know that, the protocol between a storage provider and its clients is really a function of whatever the storage vendor wants to do. Amazon does different things than Microsoft, and Microsoft does different things than Google, and on and on and on. Some of them are standards based, some of them are not much more than NFS or standards based things. Others are highly proprietary. In our case, we don't particularly care what that protocol is. Our driver model lets you implement whatever you want to implement. If you wanted to write something using JCloud, or somebody else had an existing driver that was going to plug into our architecture and use JCloud, we're fine with that. The other end of the scale, if you want to use, I don't know, something much more primitive than that and kind of code some bit level thing to talk to a storage device, you can do that too. We found that during our testing. Originally we started with the same drivers that Amazon provides for Linux and other platforms, and we found some pretty significant inefficiencies when we ran that on mainframe. So we kind of opened up some of that code and did our own implementation of it, with the result that we were able to make it 20-30 times faster. Zaac applications wouldn't know the difference other than one's faster. All of that's kind of hidden from the application. You don't have to get involved with those protocol level choices, and there's not one answer there. There's as many answers as it takes to connect to the things that you want to connect to.
So I believe you did answer it, because there's not a clarification or follow up. So thank you, Vince. And yes, it's confirmed. I think that's it. Any other questions, or how do you want to wrap up, Mark?
Sure, absolutely. I'll wait a second or two to see if we get anything else, but it doesn't look like it. All right, yeah.
Well, there was one more question about level of privileged access management that's built into Zaac.
Yeah, well, I can take that quickly. And again, one of the beauties of the Zaac approach is that by looking like any other type of storage, all of the normal controls you're accustomed to continue to work unchanged. So nobody gets to access a file on a Zaac device without your security product saying yes, they're allowed to do that. Sensitive functions require some type of extra privilege, which again typically is going to be enforced by the security products. I think you would find that no matter what's on the back end, it's going to behave, from the ZOS perspective, it's going to behave just like everything else in the data center. Now, there is a question of how do you administer the actual, let's say the Amazon resources. And again, the answer there is the same as what you're doing on every other platform. For instance, if I'm using S3 storage in a Windows or Linux environment, if I give somebody the right privileges, they certainly can connect and maybe delete some of that data, or do all kinds of horrible things. That's up to the storage provider, and certainly the best practices you're probably following for all of your other platforms probably also apply here. And a footnote to that is it also means that you can take advantage of all of those things. So I go to Amazon and I say, you know what, I want a disk that supports versioning. All of a sudden, that mainframe device that's hosted over, through Zaac over Amazon, now I can do things like point in time recovery. Bring me back to the way this data looked last Tuesday afternoon at 3:56. That's a wonderful thing. If I want to do a replication, if I want to copy in multiple Amazon data centers, I can do that too. If I want Amazon to back up that data for me so that I don't have to maybe spend as much of my resource doing it, you can do that as well. So it's all of the capabilities of the storage providers get to be available to you there. And as Mark talked about, we can do things like duplexing. I want a copy of my data on Amazon, and I want a concurrent copy in Azure. It's a different kind of fault tolerance. And of course, behind that, I might tell Amazon I want 2 copies in 2 different data centers. I might tell Microsoft the same thing. And now I've got a really bulletproof environment that doesn't cost me what it would cost me to do that with GDPS or some of the other mainframe technologies that can do that type of thing. I don't have to go out and buy this. I don't even need that second data center with something like PPRC where I'm keeping my disks in sync. I'll let the cloud provider do that for me. So I mean, don't mean to go on and on about it, but yeah, the privileged access is definitely something that needs to be thought about, and you want to make sure that you're doing the appropriate thing based on who the provider is. But I think that's part of a bigger task of how much of what they can offer am I able to really get value out of.
Excellent. Thank you, Vince. We're getting close to the end here. Mark, anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I guess the only thing I would add is we've got a ton of resources on our website, virtualzcomputing.com, that you can go and leverage, blogs, demos that I mentioned earlier. We've also got some interesting podcasts with folks like Vince and others, luminaries in the mainframe market. But yeah, I mean, if you've got additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And please explore our website and see a lot of the demos and blogs that we have out there as well. So.
Appreciate your time, everybody. Thank you for joining us today.